Hello and welcome to part 4 of the So You Want to Animate Lab series, in which Sarah Beth Morgan and I show you how you can bring your designs to life with some simple animation. Thanks for joining us. In case you missed part 3, let me just reintroduce myself really quickly. My name is Nol Honig, and I'm a director and a designer and an animator and a teacher, and I live in New York City. I teach the After Effects Kickstart class at School of Motion, and if you think today's lesson is helpful for you, you might want to check that out. In part 4 of today's lesson, what I'm going to do is go over how I would bring the awesome illustration by Sarah Beth to life in After Effects and create a looping GIF that we could post to Instagram or something. I think this is going to be really fun, and I'm going to show you some really useful After Effects tips along the way. So let's jump right in. As a reminder, here's what the illustration looks like that Sarah Beth gave us. Basically, the way she laid this out in Photoshop, all of the layers are either in these groups, which are like folders, or they are in clipping masks like this, okay? The only layer that isn't is this top stem. And I assume you're pretty familiar with how Photoshop works. I just want to show you that so that when we import it into After Effects, you can see the difference. So let's import this drawing into After Effects. I'm going to hit Command-I, okay, and then find the illustration. And then just as a reminder, from part 3 I went over this, but we do not want this as footage, which would collapse it down to one layer. We want it as a composition, so we could preserve the layers. And I'm also going to retain the layer sizes. Okay, I'm going to hit Open. Great. And I want editable layer styles, so I'll hit OK. Now, just like before in part 3, it has put our artwork up here in the project window. But unlike part 3, if I open this folder, there's a lot of layers in here. And some of them even have different icons. Let's look at this. I'm going to open my composition, double-clicking on this, all right? And now in here, we can kind of see that anything that was a group or in that folder structure or was a clipping mask in Photoshop has now become this other thing here in After Effects. And these are known as pre-comps or pre-compositions. And that basically just means that they are nested compositions within our main composition, which I know sounds a little scary and confusing at first, but actually it's really cool. So look, I'll double click on the type pre-comp, okay? And that will open up this other composition, this other timeline that, as I said, is nested within the main one. And just to show that, if I turn off the word clementines here, and I go back to my main comp, you can see that the word clementines is now gone there, okay? So anything that happens, including anything that's animated, which is kind of the point, in the pre-comps will update automatically into the main composition. So that's how this is going to work. But other than that, we're going to treat these pre-comps mostly as flat layers. So it's kind of going to be the same, but with differences. Now, there are two things that I just want to go over before we start animating. So the first thing I just want to mention is pre-visualizing your animation, which generally speaking is a really good step. And in case that doesn't make sense to you, it's just a fancy way of saying, think about ahead of time how you want it to move, all right? And as I say here, mouth noises and hand gestures are surprisingly useful for this. So in this case, I'm kind of imagining, something like that, all right? And it's also good to look at the client brief just before you start animating and actually even look at the illustration again and just kind of like think about it how you want it to go, all right? So the client brief is pretty brief in this case. It doesn't offer us that many clues, but it does say subtle and looping animation. So those are important things that we want to keep in mind. Second of all, when I look at the drawing again, it's not just the clementines in the branch that need to move. I'm also going to animate the type and the grit in the background. So in my mind, I'm thinking of ways that I can do that right now. And this is all super helpful and will allow your animation to go faster. Now there's one more stage that we have to go through before we can really start animating. Rather than animating each one of the layers in the drawing separately, what I want to do is create a skeletal system so that I can kind of animate them all together as one. This is going to take a few extra minutes to set up, but it's definitely going to save us time in the animation. Now, motion designers generally refer to this process as rigging, and rigging could be super complicated or it could be relatively simple. And we're going to stick on the simpler side today. We're going to basically just use anchor point, which I talked about briefly in part 3, and a new function that I'm going to teach you now called parenting. All right, we are ready to get rigging. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna turn off this type layer and lock that because I don't need that right away. And I think I'm also gonna lock my background layer so I don't just like click on it by accident and move it. All right, so I'm gonna turn actually off all the other layers except for this top stem for 1 second. And I'm gonna twirl down this tab and the transforms, again, to show you these 5 basic transforms. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna animate the rotation of this layer. So if I were to like rotate this now, you can see that because the anchor point is in the center, all right, let me move in on this. This is the anchor point right here, by the way. It's rotating around its own anchor point, as we talked about in part 3. And this is not how we want this to move. We want this to rotate from its own end point, all right? So I have to move the anchor point from here over to here. But if I try to do that with my regular V arrow, I will move the whole layer and not the anchor point itself, which is not what I want, okay? So how do I do that? Well, I need a new tool that's really only in After Effects, and it's called the Pan Behind tool for some reason. And the shortcut for that is Y. Here it is up here. It's a kind of icon that we really don't have anywhere else, but if you press that, okay, and now I go over to my anchor point, I can take this and move this over here to where I want it, and it doesn't move the whole layer. Yay, so the Pan Behind tool is your friend. Just to show you what this looks like, now this will rotate like this, which is what we want. Okay, so cool. I'm gonna pull back just a little bit, and let me now turn on my bottom stem. Okay, this is one of those pre-comps, but we're just gonna work with this as a flattened layer. And let me turn off the top stem for 1 sec. I still have my Pan Behind tool selected. You can tell by the kind of cursor thing. So I'm gonna grab the anchor point and move it up here to where I want this to swing from. I'm gonna get in really close and just make sure I'm kind of getting this in the right place. Cool, so now I'm gonna turn the top stem back on. Right now, if I rotate this bottom stem, I just pressed R, by the way, to reveal only the rotation property of that. I can rotate this now this way, and that's great. And I can rotate this way, but it's really not what I want. What I want is when the top stem rotates, for the bottom stem to move along with it as though they're connected right at the anchor point of the bottom stem. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, that is the function that I was just talking about called parenting. Now, when two people are in love, no, wait a second. The way that you parent in After Effects is like this, all right? So if I want my bottom stem to be connected to my top stem, which I do in this case, let me actually collapse these both down for 1 sec. The easiest way to do this, all right, is to grab this little pick whip right here. Now actually, before I start, in case you're not seeing parent and link, this little tab right here, it could be closed like this, all right? So just in case you're like, wait, no, I'm not seeing that. Go in here and right click to columns and go to parent and link. Then you'll see this too, okay? Great. Parenting, it's awesome. So check this out. If I take this little pick whip from bottom stem and I pull this over to top stem, boop. Right now you can see that in this little pull down tab, this now says layer 2, top stem. And by the way, you could parent this way as well, not with the pick whip. I just think the pick whip's fun. So anyway, so now if I press R and rotate my top stem, yes, both stems are rotating together, which is what we want. We're on our way to creating the skeletal structure, the rig. All right, so let's just do this now for everything else. I'm gonna undo that, and I'm gonna turn on this leaf here, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead, I still have my Pan Behind tool selected, shortcut Y, and I'm gonna move up here, and I'm actually gonna solo this just for a sec. So this button, by the way, is the solo button, and it'll solo any layer that you want. I'm just gonna move this here. And sometimes that's really useful when you just wanna see that one layer, okay? Now this leaf, I want parented to the top stem as well. So I'm gonna take that, boop, all right? The right leaf, I'm still have my Pan Behind tool selected. So let me find where the anchor point is. It's over here. And I'm just gonna move this up here somewhere, okay? And I can solo that real quick and just get in there and make sure I'm putting this in the right place. Details are important, all right? And so this also gets parented to that top stem. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this over, top stem, boop. And now the leaf bottom. Okay, so this one, I'm gonna move the anchor point up here, all right? Okay, so this one though, this is important. This leaf is parented to the bottom stem, all right? So let me just show this also, that I can now rotate the top stem and everything rotates with it. I can rotate the bottom stem and that leaf rotates with it. And I can also rotate the leaf itself, all right? You see where this is going now. Cool. Let's move on to this clementine here in front. Choose my pan behind tool, Y shortcut, move that anchor point over here in this little hole there, okay? And now I'm gonna turn on the other clementine. Oops, I forgot to parent the first one. So let me parent this to, that's right, the bottom stem, you guessed it. And now this one here, turn that on, pan behind tool, move the anchor point into the little hole here. Okay, and let me parent this now to my top stem. Boop, great. So now you see again, everything moves with that, which is awesome. Okay, so we're done with the rigging now, and we are ready to move on to the animation phase, which is the fun part that you've all been looking forward to, I'm sure. The thing that I want to keep in mind right away is that this is animating as a loop, so it has to begin and end the same way. It has to look the same at the beginning and end, otherwise there'll be an obvious cut in the loop, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select all my layers, and I know in my head, because of my pre-visualization process, that I just want rotation. That's the only thing that's gonna animate on any of these main layers of the stems and leaves and stuff and the oranges. So I'm gonna press R with all of these selected to reveal the rotation property. And I wanna make keyframes for all of these here at 0 degree rotation, right? Because you remember, in order to make the first keyframe, I have to press this stopwatch, and then after that, I just move the values, right? So what I'm gonna do is just go and press the stopwatch for the rotation for all of these layers at the beginning of the composition so that they're all set to 0, right? Good enough. Now, I'm also gonna go to the end, and I want 0 degree rotation keyframes for all these layers at the end too, because of the loop, right? So you'd think that I could just select all these keyframes and copy paste. But what happens, as you can see here, is that I paste every layer again, so you can't really do that, which is irritating. So what you'd have to do is like go through here and select these and copy paste them individually from each layer. But there's actually an easier way, which is this little button over here, which just means if you press this button, you're gonna add a keyframe at whatever value this says already for that layer at whatever moment in time you're at, okay? So in this case, that's exactly what I want. I want 0 rotation keyframes at the end. So I could just drag up and press that button, okay? So as you remember from part 1, I have 2 keyframes, but I have no animation right now because the keyframe values are both the same. So as I scrub through this, there's no change, right? Let's do something about that now. I'm gonna go to the middle of the comp somewhere. It doesn't really matter exactly where, but sort of in the middle. And now I wanna start rotating all these things, all right? And I'm gonna start with the top stem, because that's the driver of the action here. And when I rotate it this way, it rotates in positive numbers. And when I rotate this way, it rotates down into negative numbers, all right? So I actually think it looks nicer going in this direction. So I'm gonna work with negative numbers for this layer, all right? So now I want subtle animation. I know we've said this over and over again. It's very tempting once you start animating to really make things move around a lot, but it's not gonna look good. So I wanna keep this really subtle. Like I'm gonna make this negative 1.5 in terms of rotation, all right? And if we preview that, here's what it looks like. It's really subtle, okay? But that's what we want. So with that done, I'm gonna just stay in this area where I've got this keyframe set, and I'm gonna set rotation keyframes now in the middle for all of these other layers. And mostly I'm just gonna set them all to negative 1.5, okay? And I just want a very subtle animation. Let me preview what that looks like just with those 2 layers. You can start to see now, it's bringing some life into this because they have separate motion and you can really feel that, right? All right, so let's go ahead and just do this for everything. So for this leaf here, I'm just gonna make this negative 1, all right? Subtle animation. For this leaf here, okay, I think this one, I was kind of thinking about this, I think it can rotate in the opposite direction. That's just one that I think can rotate in the opposite direction. So I'm gonna say 1.5, positive 1.5 on that, all right? And we'll see what it looks like. Maybe I'll change my mind later. All right, for this leaf, again, just negative 1.5, I think would be good. And I could change this all later once I preview it. For the clementine, this has a little bit more weight to it than the leaf, so I'm going to say -2. And for this one, I'll say -1.5 again. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up as I go. But let's just look at what this looks like right now. Okay, so it's definitely swinging in the loop, and it's subtle. So we've kind of achieved something, right? Now, one thing that bothers me is that this leaf doesn't move. It sort of feels very much connected in lockstep to this orange because it's rotating, I think, the same amount. Let me go to the middle here and see what my value is. Yeah, so let me change this, or let me change this leaf. Okay, let me just make this like -0.5 and see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that's good. It's just a little subtler. Now, what I'll say right away when I look at this animation is that it's kind of got all the right pieces, but it feels robotic. It feels wrong. And the reason why is because all of these keyframes right now are linear. They're what's known as linear keyframes in After Effects. And what this means is that in between keyframe A and keyframe B, it moves the object at a constant rate, okay? In between the second keyframe and the third keyframe. It's always moving things at constant rates between the keyframes, and nothing in real life moves that way. In real life, if I were to move my hand from here to here, first it would sort of ease out of that, and then it would kind of ease into the final position. That's just how things move organically. They don't just start moving on a dime and move at their ultimate speed and then just stop on a dime. They ease out and they ease in, okay? So After Effects has a built-in function to help us with this. I'm going to select these keyframes here and then these keyframes here, okay? And then I'm going to right-click on a keyframe and go to Keyframe Assistant, and here you go, Easy Ease, or the beloved shortcut F9. I'm going to press that now, all right? And now you see the diamond-shaped keyframes have turned into these hourglass-shaped keyframes, and let's just preview that to see what the difference is. Yeah, and I think you can see right away, the action feels much better. It just feels more organic. It's just the way, it's just much closer to how things would swing in real life, all right? So Easy Ease is really going to be your friend for these subtle animations. So now it's time for me to move on to the last two elements, the type and the background, and I have to go kind of quickly here because I'm running out of time. So let me jump into my type, all right, and let me explain something that's really awesome. If you have live type from Photoshop, that was live in Photoshop, in After Effects, it's no longer like a live type layer, but you can convert it really easily by right-clicking and go to Create and then Convert to Editable Text. And now it's like editable text that I could type something else in there. So that's really useful, especially because of this next step. What I want to do is put an effect preset, like a pre-animated element on this type. There's some really awesome effects and presets in this window, Effects and Presets. You could also go to Window, Effects and Presets and open it there, okay? It gives you this little search bar, and then I'm going to type typewriter in there, or start to type typewriter. And then you can see there's an animation preset named typewriter. And if I grab this and drag this down on top of my type layer, right now it's disappeared. And if I press U, you can see, oh, and by the way, U, the shortcut U is the universal keyboard shortcut to reveal all animated properties. All right, so that's really useful. So here I have an end state of the animation and a beginning state of the animation and an end state. So if I move these two closer together and then preview this for you, you can see that the word clementines just kind of types itself on there. And that's really useful, really great tip for social media posts, the typewriter preset. Anyway, I'm also going to go to the end here, and I'm going to copy this and paste it there, and then copy the first keyframe and paste it there so it like types itself back off at the end, okay? Moving rather quickly, what I also want to do is fade the word figure one on. So I'm going to animate the opacity. So I'm going to press T to reveal the opacity property. I'm going to make a 100% opacity keyframe by pressing the stopwatch. You remember that now. Now I can go back to the beginning and just dial this down to 0. I'm going to do the same thing at the end as I did on the clementines, where I just kind of copy this 100% keyframe here and then just dial this back down to 0 at the end. So that now fades up and fades out. Pretty simple animation. And then finally, I want to talk about this line here. I want to draw this on, or have it look like this is drawing itself on, and I want to use a mask, which is not something I've talked about yet, so let me quickly go into this. If I go up here to my toolbar, I've got a rectangle tool that's pretty similar to the one in Photoshop and Illustrator. The keyboard shortcut is Q, but forget about that. If I choose this, okay, and I have my line selected, if I marquee over this, now you can see I'm just drawing it on screen. So basically, if I set the mask over here with it off, okay, and then After Effects automatically opens the mask property. So otherwise you could press M to reveal that. And what I want to do is I want to animate the mask path. So I'm going to press this here, okay, to make a mask path keyframe where it's kind of off. I'm going to move to where these other keyframes are. I'm going to press V to get my V arrow. And now I'm going to kind of carefully select just the end 2 points of the mask and drag this over until it gets to the end, which is right there actually. So now I've created a mask animation that just draws that line on like that. That's pretty cool. And just like the other pieces, I'm gonna copy this here and go to the end and paste the off mask state at the end as well, all right? So now let me go back to my main comp and let's watch this all together. Yeah, and you can see right away that that's like really fun, okay? So moving on, because I am running out of time here, I'm going to animate the grit in the background really quickly, all right? Basically for these scatter dots for this texture here, I want this kind of like gritty old movie projector kind of staccato animation where it's like, okay? And there's actually a kind of keyframe in After Effects that will do this. It's called a hold keyframe. Let me demo this for you. I'm going to press P to reveal my position. I'm going to make a position keyframe here. I'm going to move forward 10 frames by hitting Shift and page down, okay? So I'm at frame 10. Now, what I want is for this to have like shifted over just say like here. But as you remember in After Effects, it will put the animation between those two keyframe states, and we don't want that. We want it to hold one state until it reaches the next state, and then we want it to just switch all at once and hold that state, okay? In After Effects, those are called hold keyframes, so check it out. Right now, it's animating between them. But if I select both of these keyframes, both of them, and I right-click here, I can go to Toggle Hold Keyframe. Toggle just means turn on and off like a light switch, right? So basically we've just turned these on to become hold keyframes. So now it holds this value until it gets here and then it switches, right? And that's just what we want. So I'm gonna move another 10 frames and I'm just gonna move this over here. I'm gonna move another 10 frames and put it over there. Another 10 frames here, another 10 frames here. And basically I just wanna get to right here, which is 10 frames, I think, before the end of the comp. Yep, so now it'll create a nice loop. Okay, so now I can just look at this back in my main comp and preview this. Yeah, and I think this looks totally charming and awesome. The one final note I would say is that now that we have motion on the background grit, it's more present than I think Sarah Beth wanted it to be, or that's how it feels to me. It steals a little bit of attention from the type. So I'm gonna get into my background. I'm just gonna press T to reveal the opacity of this. I'm just gonna not animate this. I'm just gonna set this down to like 50%, okay? So it's a little bit lighter on screen, and then let's look at that. Yeah, I think that looks really charming, and so just a little less present, right? I just noticed one thing which I think can make this animation a little bit stronger. I'm gonna display the rotation of all these layers, okay? And right now, all of these keyframes in the middle are in the same exact moment in time. And in real life, nothing would ever move so that it's like exactly locked into everything else like that. If we want to give this a slightly more organic feeling in the animation, all I'd have to do is kind of redistribute these keyframes a little bit in the middle here, and it would create a kind of looser feeling to the animation, all right? So check this out. I'm just gonna move this back a couple of frames and this. Just want to make sure that like all these things happen, just at slightly different points. I mean, when it turns, when it changes direction, okay? It's a small thing, but check out the difference now. Yeah, I think this just goes a long way to giving it that extra little bit of organic flair, and now I feel like this is really done. As you remember from part 3, once the animation is done, now it's time to render, which basically just means to take what's in After Effects and turn it into a tangible thing like a QuickTime movie or an animated GIF that you could post on Instagram. So as you remember from part 3, I'm just going to go up to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Q, or Option Command M is the shortcut. Okay, so this is the correct animation, Fruits of the Trade. And like I explained earlier in part 3, it's basically going to give whatever the last render settings that you had on there automatically. So in this case, it's given it an animated GIF setting. Just in case this wasn't clear or you missed part 3, all you have to do is pull this down and find animated GIF, and that should be okay. In this case, we don't need to press this button because we want it 1500 by 1500, which is exactly the way the source is. So we just want to keep everything the way that it was. And then finally, I'm just going to click in here and give it a name and find a good place to put this, like here. Okay. And I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to go ahead and press the button to start rendering. And basically at this point, we're all done and we're just waiting for that special render chime noise, which means we're done. And there it is. Now I'm going to just go ahead and click on this little link here and let's preview the animation. Yeah, I love this. I think this looks really fun and really subtle and has a lot of life to it. So awesome. And with that, we are really, really done. I just want to thank Sarah Beth Morgan again and say that I think we did a really great job in this lab. In these last 2 hours, we basically walked you from design concepting all the way through design and illustration and into technical rigging and animation and all the way through how to render for social media. I think we covered a lot, and I'm really hoping that this is going to be really useful to getting you started on bringing some life to your animation. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all the Adobe people for making this possible. And this was really great. So thank you again.